I woke to the sound of machines humming and someone saying my name as if it didn't quite belong to me anymore. Before I could fully remember where I was, a face leaned close. It was my son Marcus. His lips brushed my ear, his voice low so only I could hear through the ringing in my head. "We've already decided where you'll live." For a moment I thought I misheard, anesthesia still thick in my veins, my tongue too heavy to form questions. My chest filled with that strange mix of gratitude for surviving surgery, and sudden dread that had nothing to do with my body. I tried to turn my head. I saw them standing around my bed. Marcus, not meeting my eyes. His wife Sabrina, arms folded, expression already finished with me. No one smiled. No one said, "Are you okay?" They just watched me wake up, as if I were no longer part of the discussion. I wanted to ask, decided what? Why? Decided without me? But my voice came out as a whisper swallowed by the oxygen hiss. The machines continued their rhythm. The room stayed cold. Their decision already existed, and I hadn't even been allowed back into my own life yet. I thought the surgery was my battle. I didn't know the war would begin after it. The explanation didn't come. No one answered the questions I couldn't quite say out loud. They had already planned something for me, and all I had done was survive. When I finally slept through the first night after surgery, the monitors hummed softly beside me, steady, indifferent witnesses. I stared at the ceiling tiles and told myself I needed to remember who I was before all of this, before whispers about where I'll live began circling my hospital bed like cold air. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe and comment where you're watching from. My name is Elaine Moritz. For 37 years, I was a librarian, the quiet kind people forget until they need help finding something important. I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona, in a little cedar-trimmed house Daniel and I bought when interest rates were high and our dreams were higher. It still smells like pine sap in summer and cinnamon in winter, because Daniel insisted every December that a house should smell like comfort. Daniel, my husband, my partner, my reason to laugh at bad television. Heart failure took him in the blue hours of a Tuesday morning, a quiet thief, and the world rearranged itself without asking my permission. I learned what silence really is after that. Not peace. Just absence. I retired after his passing. Not because I wanted to stop working, but because walking past the cardiology pamphlets shelf felt like reopening the wound every day. I told myself I'd earned rest. I volunteered at Mesa community reading programs, tying shoelaces and sounding out words with children whose names I still remember. I used my little librarian voice, the one that never scared anyone, and I reminded kids they mattered. I was always a saver, never a spender. Coupons, clipped receipts, just-in-case jars. The house is paid off. The roof fixed twice. I thought that was what responsible adults did, build something solid so their children would never have to worry. And speaking of children, I am the mother of two. Marcus, my son, successful, polished, phone always buzzing. He hugs me the way people hug something fragile, carefully, without lingering. He talks about market trends, condo associations, networking breakfasts. He loves me, I know he does, but his love is efficient. Scheduled. It arrives between meetings and leaves before dessert. Lena, my daughter, lives in Portland now. We say estranged, but words like that don't explain the quiet years, or the arguments that start small and then turn into storms you don't know how to stop. She sends postcards sometimes. They smell like rain and coffee shops. I keep them in a drawer and pretend we're not strangers to each other. My body started giving out before my spirit did. First the knee replacement, which was supposed to give me freedom. Instead, it gave me complications. Infections that don't listen. Appointments postponed. Insurance denials written in language colder than hospital floors. I spent afternoons on hold listening to recorded voices thanking me for my patience while bills stacked like pale little threats on the kitchen table. Medicare forms blurred together. Prescription bottles multiplied. Prices carried more zeros than my checkbook liked. I learned how to ration pills the same way I once rationed cookies for my children, carefully, quietly, hoping no one noticed. Through all of it, I kept repeating one promise to myself: do not become a burden. I baked casseroles I could barely lift. I laughed even when standing hurt. I told Marcus and Lena I was fine so many times the words started losing meaning. Because that's who I've always tried to be. Loyal, useful, the person who holds the family photo while everyone else runs ahead. I raised them to be kind, I tell myself now, lying beneath hospital lights. I just didn't realize kindness doesn't always come back the same way. As those words echo in my head, I understand something new: the surgery was not the battle. The battle is what happens after, when the people you trusted start making plans for your life, without asking whether you're still inside it. When you're lying in a hospital bed, you learn to read people the way librarians read margins. The real story is often written in the small print. The first character in this new chapter of my life is, of course, Marcus, my son, my pride, my ache. Marcus works with a tech company in Austin, the kind of field where sentences are built out of acronyms and futures are measured in quarters. He talks about scalability, optimization, burn rate, the way other people talk about weather. Even when he's being affectionate, there's an invisible spreadsheet somewhere behind his eyes, always calculating. His love language is efficiency. He visits with an itinerary. He hugs with one arm while checking his watch with the other. He means well, but warmth has to fit into his calendar first. He lives with his wife, Sabrina, in a condo full of glass, white walls, and things that look like they came out of magazines instead of stores. Sabrina calls their style minimalist, but it feels less like simplicity and more like erasing anything that doesn't photograph well. Sabrina, yes, Sabrina is the second key character. To the world, she is an Instagram-perfect humanitarian. She runs an online page about caregiving advocacy, posting filtered pictures of holding wrinkled hands in warm lighting and long captions about compassion. She knows which angle makes concern look beautiful. She knows how to cry without smudging mascara. People comment, "You're such an angel." So inspiring. Caregivers are heroes. They don't see the other Sabrina. The one who looks at me and doesn't see a person. She sees a problem to be budgeted, a line item. She has a way of tilting her head that feels like she's already decided something and is just waiting for me to catch up. She uses phrases like resource intensive and says them as if she's commenting on gas mileage and not a human life. Her compassion is performance. Her patience ends where the camera lens does. And then, circling this strange new battlefield, are the people who don't pretend to be anything other than what they are. There is Dr. Callum Reyes, my surgeon, tall, serious, the kind of man who carries the quiet weight of too many middle-of-the-night decisions. His words are precise, but his eyes are human. When he explains risks, he doesn't hide behind jargon. He looks at you like he knows you're someone's mother, someone's whole world. There is Maya Trenor, the hospital's social worker. She has the kind of gentleness that doesn't announce itself. She notices when I get tired, when I'm pretending not to be afraid. She straightens my blanket without making it feel like a favor. She lowers her voice in a way that tells me she understands that dignity is fragile and must be handled carefully. Beyond hospital walls, there's Frankie Dell, my neighbor back in Flagstaff, a Vietnam veteran with a gravel voice and a heart he pretends is tougher than it is. He once fixed my mailbox with duct tape and righteous indignation, muttering, "Can't have you looking like you're alone out here." He pretends to just grumble, but he watches my house the way sentries watch gates. And finally, Reverend Milton Price, from the little Denver church I wandered into after Daniel died. No theatrics. No booming sermons. Just a grounded, warm presence and a habit of pouring tea as if tea itself were a prayer. He never told me what God wanted. He asked me what I needed. All of these people stand now like figures on a chessboard around my future. Some will push me, some will protect me, and some will use me. But as I lie in that hospital bed, with anesthesia still whispering fog through my thoughts, all I know is this. The people who say they love you do not always mean the same thing by it. And the ones you expect to fight for you are not always the ones who step forward when the fight actually begins. I had known for weeks that the knee replacement was unavoidable. My left knee had been giving out for years, a slow erosion of independence. Walking to the mailbox in Flagstaff felt like climbing a mountain, each step measured, cautious, a negotiation between pride and pain. But no one tells you about the pre-surgery limbo, the kind that leaves you trapped in a sterile, fluorescent hospital ER for hours. That day, at St. Elora Medical Center in Denver, I waited in a small curtained cubicle while nurses scurried past with charts and clipped phrases. The clock ticked louder than it should have. Every beep from the monitors reminded me that time was passing, and I was powerless. The anxiety didn't just come from waiting. I have always had a fear of anesthesia. That moment when your consciousness is suspended, a surrender to strangers and chemicals, it is intimate and terrifying in equal measure. I remember gripping the plastic armrest until my knuckles ached, my chest tight, imagining myself slipping away while the world continued without me. The last clear memory I had before they wheeled me to the operating theater was Marcus standing near the door, holding a stack of brochures from assisted living facilities. He spoke loudly, as if the room needed to hear him more than I did. "Mom, look at these options, really think about where you'll be comfortable. We've already decided what's best." At the time, I tried to smile through the haze of anxiety and confusion. I thought he meant well. I thought it was concern. I didn't yet know the weight those words would carry after I woke, whispered in a tone meant to settle a plan that I hadn't agreed to. As the sedation began to take hold, my mind wandered, not to the hospital, not to the brochures, but to memories that carried their own quiet ache. I remembered shaving Daniel's beard in the hospice room, the morning after his final heart failure episode. His hands were cold, but he smiled faintly, letting me take care of him in a small, intimate act. Nobody else came by. The world had moved on, the neighbors had stopped dropping by, even some family members said they couldn't handle it. But I stayed. I remembered sitting by his side through the long silent nights, holding his hand through the medication cycles, listening to the monitor's beeps as if they were a heartbeat that needed protection. That's when it struck me, the difference between love that stays and love that performs. Daniel's friends, who sent flowers and social media condolences, were the performers. They were visible, public, and fleeting. I was the one who stayed. I was the one present when no one else was. It's a lesson I carried into my relationship with my children, though I hadn't realized it then. I had given Marcus and Lena my all. I had taught them kindness and responsibility, thinking those seeds would bloom naturally. But kindness, I would learn, doesn't always return in the form you expect. Sometimes it is measured, calculated, or filtered through ambition and self-interest. And as the room tilted into the haze of anesthesia, I clung to that truth. The measure of care isn't in the brochures, the opinions, or the Instagram posts. It is in the hours you spend in silence, in the cold, in the messy reality of being there when the world is absent. I woke groggy, my eyelids heavy, every muscle aching as if my body had been dissolved into the sheets. The overhead lights in the recovery room at St. Elora Medical Center were bright, almost cruel, cutting through the fog of anesthesia like a blade. And then I heard it. Marcus leaned close, his voice low, almost clinical, but carrying a weight that made my chest tighten. "We've already decided where you'll live." The words hung in the air, cold and deliberate, like a verdict already delivered. I blinked, trying to shake the haze, trying to convince myself I had misheard. But his eyes didn't waver. The corners of his mouth tightened, not with warmth, but with precision. It was managerial, final, not a suggestion. Beside him, Sabrina stood holding a thick binder with a crisp label, Transition Plan. She smiled, the kind of carefully measured smile that Instagram influencers post after a yoga retreat, reassuring the world that everything is calm, curated, and perfect. Her voice was smooth, polished, almost rehearsed. Elaine, we've thought of everything. It's really best for everyone. Streamlined care, fewer complications. You'll like it there. I tried to speak, my throat dry, my voice barely above a whisper. But it came out as a rasp, a shadow of protest. Wait. They didn't wait. The room stretched into silence. It wasn't loud, not confrontational, not dramatic. But it was heavy, the kind of quiet that presses on your chest, that makes your body feel smaller than it should. I looked around, noticing things I hadn't before in my days. The hospital staff had already adjusted my discharge paperwork. Maya Trenor, the social worker, offered a small, almost imperceptible sympathetic nod, but she didn't interfere. Marcus had already called the realtor. My mail forwarding had been cancelled without my knowledge. Every little detail had been handled, decided, orchestrated, and I had been left out entirely. I tried to absorb it. My body was still weak, my legs trembling from surgery, and yet my mind raced. How could they treat me this way? My son, my own flesh and blood, had spoken as if I were a patient to be managed, not a mother to be consulted. And Sabrina, she had curated her role as care advocate so flawlessly that anyone watching would think she was doing me a favor. But I knew the truth. I had seen it before in small, subtle ways, the way she rolled her eyes when I asked questions about coverage, the way she documented every incident in a notebook she kept hidden until the right moment, the way she framed every decision as for my own good. You'll like it there, she repeated, as if repetition could seal my consent. I wanted to argue, to protest, to remind them of every hour I had stayed awake through fevers and nausea, every day I had managed medications, every night I had sat by the hospital bed long before the surgery. But my body refused. Weak from anesthesia and pain, I could only lie back, letting the room fill with the heavy silence of decisions made without me. I watched as they exchanged a small, almost conspiratorial glance, as if my own helplessness had become their cue to finalize the plan. Marcus tapped the binder lightly, like he was checking off boxes in a project management app. Sabrina adjusted the table nearby to make sure the paperwork was perfectly aligned. Every detail had been anticipated, every step preemptive. And in that quiet, with my strength sapped, I realized the unthinkable. They were not asking. They were not seeking my opinion. They had already drawn the lines. My home, my life, my future had been parceled out while I slept through the most vulnerable hours of my existence. It was not just the whisper. It was the weight behind it, the calculated certainty that left no room for me, no room for discussion, no room for choice. And in that moment, lying in that stark hospital room, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt since Daniel passed: betrayal. Even as the haze of anesthesia lingered, my eyes started noticing things that didn't belong. On the bedside tray, neatly arranged as if waiting for me to approve them, were documents I hadn't signed, or even asked for. There were facility brochures from Silvercrest residents, glossy pages showing bright common rooms, gentle sunlight on walking paths, cheerful seniors playing chess. But it wasn't the imagery that struck me. It was that the brochures had my name already written on them, in neat block letters. Next, I saw insurance papers, pre-signed in Marcus's precise hand, the kind of handwriting that belongs to accountants and engineers. And tucked under them was a draft power of attorney, my signature blank but with every detail filled in, choices already made, decisions already taken, my autonomy already bypassed. My heart sank. I swallowed past the ache in my chest and tried to steady my voice. Maya Trenor, the hospital social worker, lingered at the door, her hands clasped, eyes soft but hesitant. She spoke quietly, almost like a whisper herself. "Elaine, you deserve to know all of your options." I looked up at her, grateful for the hint of allyship, and started asking questions. Small questions at first. Why are these signed? Who authorized this? Did Marcus? And every time I tried to ask, Sabrina intervened, cutting across my words smoothly, almost surgically. "Elaine, it's all in your best interest. Don't worry about the details. Just rest." Her voice was calm, but every syllable was a brick wall. Marcus shifted in his chair, avoiding my gaze entirely. He didn't offer explanations. He didn't defend the papers. He just sat, tense, silent, a careful distance in his posture that spoke volumes. And then it hit me. This wasn't something that happened in the last 24 hours. It wasn't even something that started when I woke from surgery. Every single document, every careful arrangement, the realtor call, the mail forwarding cancellation, the binder labeled transition plan, it had been planned long before I even entered the OR. They had orchestrated my life while I was under anesthesia. Every helpful smile, every rehearsed line about streamlined care and best for everyone was part of a plan. And I had walked into it, vulnerable, unaware, trusting. I felt a mixture of disbelief, heartbreak, and that first seed of determination. This wasn't just about comfort, or relocation, or even money. This was about respect. Autonomy. The dignity I had earned over decades. And they thought they could decide it all without me. The weight of realization pressed on me like the line in my arm, constant and inescapable. I couldn't fight physically yet, but my mind began cataloging everything. Every small act. Every interruption. Every document. Every word whispered while I was still groggy. And that's when the first flicker of a plan started forming in my head. I would not be erased. I would not be bypassed. Before I tell you how far they had already gone behind my back, do one small thing. Too many people my age go through this quietly, believing we're disposable. If you believe elders deserve a voice, don't just watch. Comment you still matter and subscribe to this channel. Granny Olivia's voice. I closed my eyes for a moment, leaning back against the hospital pillow, and let the memories roll in, uninvited but relentless. I remembered the nights when I worked double shifts at the Flagstaff Public Library, shelving, cataloging, answering questions until my legs ached and my voice cracked. Those evenings weren't about recognition, nobody was waiting at home with applause, but about keeping the lights on, keeping food in the cupboards. I remembered the time Marcus needed help paying for tuition at Arizona State University. I had sold my mother's jewelry, the delicate gold bracelets she had once worn every Sunday to church. I can still feel their cool weight in my palm, the faint scent of the polish my father had used decades ago. It wasn't about the metal. It was about giving Marcus a chance at the future I couldn't afford for myself. And then there was Noah, my grandchild, barely 3, when daycare fell through one week in January. I drove through icy roads from Flagstaff to Phoenix, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached, the heater blasting, Noah asleep in the back seat, his little arms draped across his chest. I remember the smell of wet boots, socks soaked through from snow, drying by the old space heater as we huddled under blankets in my living room, ramen for dinner, forks clinking in the quiet. I remembered the long drives across states, storms raging, wipers swiping furiously, headlights cutting through sheets of rain. I was alone most of the time, but the car smelled faintly of peppermint gum, winter coats, and determination. I kept driving because someone had to, someone always had to. I stayed when staying was hard. I stayed when people left. I stayed when gratitude was silent, when effort was invisible, when exhaustion pressed into my chest like a heavy stone. I had learned that love isn't always a dramatic declaration. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's unnoticed. Sometimes it's the early mornings, the late nights, the bowls of ramen shared in silence. And in that moment, lying in the sterile hospital room, listening to the soft beeping of monitors, the scent of antiseptic mixing with my memories, I realized, all those years of invisible devotion had led me here. They had shaped who I was, a woman who stayed. A woman who loved through difficulty, through absence, through storm and snow. I opened my eyes slowly, letting the flashback fade, but carrying the weight of it with me. Because if they thought a signed paper or a binder could erase decades of loyalty, they were wrong. Every act, every sacrifice, every silent moment of care was etched into my life. And it was time they realized it, even if they never said it aloud. I had just returned home from a short walk around the garden outside my apartment when my phone buzzed, not once, but a steady stream of notifications. At first, I thought it was the usual, messages from friends asking how I was recovering from surgery, reminders for prescription refills, a few texts from Lena checking in from Portland. But then I noticed the flood of comments on a post I hadn't even seen being made. The post was by Sabrina. My daughter-in-law, the Instagram perfect advocate, the woman who smiled for the camera while privately calling me resource-intensive behind closed doors. She had shared a photo, or rather, an edited version of one of me in the hospital bed. My eyes looked glassy. My frail hands rested on the blanket. But someone had softened the edges, brightened the light. To any outsider, it looked delicate. Vulnerable. Dependent. The caption read, "Caring for aging relatives is such a heavy responsibility. Sometimes you don't know how to say no. Love doesn't always come easy." Comments poured in like a wave. "So proud of you for stepping up. It's not easy, but you're doing the right thing. Don't let her guilt you. She'll never understand what it's like." I froze. My own life, my own struggle, my years of sacrifice, were now being repackaged as burden and drama for public applause. I had not been asked to approve any of this. I had not consented to anyone posting my condition online. And yet, thousands of strangers were being invited to weigh in, to witness, to judge. I could see Marcus hovering nearby, pretending to scroll through emails on his laptop. His jaw was tight, his expression distant, the practiced neutrality I had seen so many times before. He didn't make a move to stop it. He didn't offer a word of defense. Just silence. And that was the point, wasn't it? To control the narrative before I even had a voice. To make me the subject of a story I hadn't written, a story that suited someone else's image of compassion. The irony was cruel. All those years I had stayed when others disappeared, caring for my husband Daniel through his heart failure, for Marcus and Lena when life went sideways. Now my devotion was being framed as my weakness, my frailty, my guilt. I sank into the couch, staring at the screen. My hands, still trembling from the surgery and anxiety, hovered over the phone. The comments kept coming, strangers offering sympathy to a story that wasn't mine, their kindness twisted into ammunition for Sabrina's curated persona. The public version of reality was taking shape without a single word from me. The line between truth and performance had blurred, and I realized this was just the beginning. The message was clear, my personal struggle, my decades of sacrifice, my voice, none of it mattered unless filtered through her lens. The ping of my inbox was subtle, almost polite, but my heart lurched the moment I saw the subject line, "Documents for review, immediate action recommended." I clicked, even though my fingers shook from both surgery fatigue and rising unease. 2 documents opened instantly, a durable power of attorney transfer and a home equity line application, pre-filled, digital signatures already marked with dates I didn't recognize. I barely had time to breathe before Marcus, leaning against the kitchen counter in his usual efficiency stance, said in that calm, measured tone he always reserves for practical matters. "Mom, it's just paperwork. Nothing to worry about." His words should have reassured me, but instead, they were like a cold layer of fog settling over the room. The way he said it, detached, unemotional, carried the weight of something rehearsed. I glanced at the documents again, scanning each clause, each line. And then, slowly, the pieces fell into place. I overheard him speaking quietly to Sabrina on speakerphone in the next room. I couldn't help but listen, though my pulse quickened. Once Mom signs, the Flagstaff house goes into the care management fund. No delays. Realtors ready. All accounts linked. We just finalized the transfer after surgery. My chest tightened. They were talking as if I weren't even in the room, as if my home, my history, my independence, could be moved, monetized, and managed without my consent. I sat down heavily on the dining chair, the metal frame cold under my hands. Images flashed through my mind. The little home in Flagstaff where Daniel and I had painted the nursery walls for Marcus. The porch swing where I had rocked Noah to sleep when daycare fell through. The evening sunsets I had watched from that same porch, sipping tea, thinking life was simple and safe. And now, all of it could vanish with a few digital strokes. It hit me like ice water. This wasn't just about convenience. It wasn't even only about money. It was about control. My home, my decisions, my autonomy, all framed as best for everyone, all pushed forward while I was weak, recovering, trusting my own son to care for me. I remembered Maya Trenor, the hospital social worker, saying softly the other day, "You deserve to know all of your options." But now I understood that option wasn't a gift. It was a warning. Because if I refused or hesitated, there would be a paper trail showing me as resistant, uncooperative, even incapable. Sabrina emerged from the kitchen, holding a coffee cup with a perfect foam heart on top, smiling like nothing was wrong. Her voice was smooth, almost syrupy. "Mom, this is all for your peace of mind. Everything is planned so you don't have to worry." I looked at her, then at Marcus, then back at the documents. The calm efficiency in their eyes was more terrifying than any argument, any shouting match. They weren't trying to persuade me. They had already framed the narrative so that my resistance would look unreasonable. I realized, in that moment, that I was staring down the first layer of a legal trap, papers pre-signed, plans pre-approved, a system set up to appear as if I had agreed voluntarily, when in truth every step had been orchestrated without my knowledge. And that's when a strange clarity hit me. I may have been weak from surgery, vulnerable in body, but my mind was sharper than they knew. Every file, every signature, every term, it would either be my undoing or my proof. Because this wasn't just about a house, or a bank account, or an assisted living plan. It was about my dignity, my autonomy, and my voice being erased under the guise of care. I took a deep breath, feeling the ache in my knee, the residual haze of anesthesia, and whispered to myself, if they think this ends with a signature, they don't know who they're dealing with. I was still sitting in the hospital room, staring at the documents, feeling the cold edge of betrayal slicing through every thought. The hum of the air conditioner mixed with the beeping of monitors, and for a long moment, the room felt like a trap. My hands trembled as I picked up the pen Marcus had left beside my paperwork. That's when Maya Trenor quietly returned. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She simply appeared beside my bed, her expression calm, careful, a softness I hadn't noticed the first time. Without a word, she slipped a small business card into my hand. I held it delicately, almost afraid to break it. Printed in neat serif font were 3 words that felt heavier than any medical chart: Ruth Calder, attorney. Maya leaned closer, lowering her voice as if the walls themselves could listen. "Elaine, if you ever feel pressured, confused, or pushed into something you don't want, call her. No questions. No judgments. Just guidance. I looked at her, hesitant. You think I need a lawyer? Maya nodded, carefully. Her eyes softened, not with pity, but with quiet understanding. I've seen it before, she said, almost in a whisper. My grandmother, very sharp woman, was pushed into a facility without her consent. Papers signed while she slept. Decisions made that weren't hers. She had no idea until it was too late. The story hit me like a jolt. I remembered news reports, headlines from Nevada, Florida, even California, about guardianship abuse and elder financial exploitation. Elderly people losing control of their homes, their money, their lives, all under the guise of care. The fear, the humiliation, the helplessness, it was real. Too real. Maya's hand rested lightly on my arm. You're not alone. You don't have to do this quietly. You can fight. You deserve to have your voice heard. I stared at the card again, Ruth Calder. The letters seemed to hum with possibility. Maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. A way to stop this from being the end of my story, and instead make it the beginning of reclaiming control. The room felt slightly larger. The weight on my chest shifted from suffocating to something I could bear. It wasn't the betrayal that mattered most in this moment, it was the first glimmer of hope. I held the card close, almost like a talisman, and whispered to myself, I won't disappear quietly. Not this time. I could feel the anger rising, sharp and raw, coiling in my chest like a living thing. Every fiber of me wanted to shout, to demand, to make Marcus and Sabrina understand that I had spent decades building a life, a home, a family, a legacy. And yet here I was, lying in a hospital bed, recovering from a surgery I had survived only to face a war I hadn't even anticipated. Marcus leaned closer, checking the monitors like a technician, his eyes avoiding mine. Mom, it's just logistics, he said, voice clipped, almost rehearsed. We're making sure everything is ready. You'll be fine. I wanted to shake him. I wanted to scream, you don't get to decide for me. I'm still here. I'm alive. But I stopped. I drew a shaky breath and let my hand rest on the bed rail, trying to steady my pulse, trying to remind myself, restraint can be more powerful than rage. Finally, I said, my voice quiet but firm, we will discuss this when I'm fully conscious. When I can think for myself and make my own decisions. Sabrina's lips pressed into a tight line. She didn't smile. She didn't soften. She leaned forward, binder clutched to her chest, and said in that clipped, rehearsed tone that made my skin crawl. Decisions don't wait. This is best for everyone. The words hit harder than any slap. Best for everyone? I felt the weight of betrayal settle deep in my chest. Gratitude for surviving the surgery mixed with a hollow ache. My own son and his wife had already moved ahead, writing my life into a plan that I hadn't agreed to, hadn't even been consulted about. I realized, in that moment, that this wasn't just about my living arrangements. It was about control, about their perception of power over me, about shaping my reality while I was weak, groggy, recovering. And even though I was too tired, too groggy, too weak to argue in that moment, the emotional wound dug deeper than I could have imagined. Marcus averted his gaze, hands tightening at his sides. Sabrina's binder was like a wall between us, neatly organized, professional, but impersonal, cold, and deliberate. And in that silence, I understood something vital. This confrontation, this clash I had imagined, would not happen here, not like I wanted. If I tried to meet force with force, I would lose more than just dignity. I would lose the clarity and control I needed to fight back in a way that mattered. I let the silence stretch, tasting it like bitter medicine. I let the anger settle into a sharper focus, a resolve I could use later. I would fight, but on my terms. I would not let weakness dictate the narrative. I would not let them think they had already won. And in that quiet, weighted moment, I understood the difference between love that stays and love that performs. Their actions were performance. My survival, my presence, my decisions, that was love that stayed. And it mattered more than any Instagram perfect post, any binder labeled transition plan, any logistical justification. If you were in that bed, fresh from surgery, and someone decided your entire life without asking you, would anyone defend you? If your answer is I'm not sure, then please subscribe and tell me in the comments who would stand up for you. Your voice is all we elders have left. Don't let it fade quietly while someone else writes your story. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the faint hum of the hospital monitors fill the silence. My body was weak, but my mind was finally catching up to the truth. Marcus and Sabrina hadn't waited until I was better to make decisions. They had already set plans in motion, my mail redirected, my home on the market, insurance changes made, all without asking me. Shaking slightly, I reached for my phone. My fingers hovered over the contacts list until I found the name I had clutched in my mind all afternoon, Ruth Calder. The line clicked, and a calm, firm voice answered, almost immediately. Elaine? I've been expecting your call. We arranged for her to meet me in the hospital room. When she arrived, she wore a simple denim jacket, the kind of casual warmth that put you immediately at ease, but her eyes held the sharp focus of someone who had seen every attempt to exploit the vulnerable. She smiled gently. Nothing happens without consent. Not today, she said softly, placing a folder on my bedside table. Her presence shifted the energy in the room. Sabrina hovered nearby, clutching her binder, but suddenly the power dynamic felt different. I wasn't the fragile patient to be maneuvered. I had an ally now. Ruth spoke calmly, explaining the steps we could take to stop any unauthorized actions. Capacity evaluations to officially document my ability to make decisions, revoking the unauthorized documents that had been drafted or signed in my absence, safeguarding my primary residence to prevent any transfer or sale without my express consent. Every word Ruth spoke felt like a shield forming around me. I realized that the legal world, which had seemed intimidating and labyrinthine, could actually protect me if approached with patience and precision. I shook my head slowly at Sabrina and Marcus, who were both watching, mouths slightly open. I didn't need to say anything. Ruth's presence, her calm authority, made it clear nothing would move forward without me. I signed nothing. I agreed to nothing. And for the first time that day, I felt a small but steady surge of power. Even weak and recovering, even groggy from anesthesia, I understood the truth. I was not disposable. My voice still mattered. My home, my autonomy, my life, they were still mine. Ruth stayed with me for a while longer, reviewing documents quietly, marking items that could be challenged, noting the next steps. I listened carefully, absorbing every detail, every strategy. The knowledge alone was a kind of armor. And in that quiet hospital room, I realized something important. The battle wasn't about yelling or forcing anyone to see their wrongs. The battle was about control over my own story, my own choices, my own dignity. Sabrina shifted uneasily, realizing that this quiet, methodical approach was far more dangerous than any confrontation I could have staged. Marcus, too, seemed unsure how to proceed. Efficiency and managerial tone met with legal precision, and it gave them pause. For the first time since waking from surgery, I felt a flicker of calm. The war hadn't ended, it wouldn't for weeks, but at least now, I had a map. And the map had a guide I could trust. Ruth didn't rush. She spread the papers across my bedside tray like a general surveying a battlefield, her movements deliberate, calm, unhurried. I leaned forward in my hospital bed, still weak from surgery, but my pulse quickened in a way I hadn't expected, anticipation mixed with dread. The first stack of emails was from Marcus to Sabrina, timestamped over the last 2 months. They weren't just discussing care plans. The language was clinical, almost cold. Mom will adjust better if we manage all correspondence. Home sale should be completed before her knee fully recovers. I swallowed hard. My own son had been treating my recovery like a project timeline. Next were notes from a real estate agent in Scottsdale. A pending listing. Offers already solicited. We can handle the showing while she's in rehab, one email read. They weren't hiding it, they were confident, almost casual, that I wouldn't notice until it was too late. Then there was the clincher, the facility deposit receipt for Silvercrest residents, signed by Marcus. The transition date had been preset, without my input, without a single conversation. The handwriting on the deposit form, my son's, crisp and precise, felt like a slap to my heart. They had plotted every detail while I was under anesthesia, thinking I'd never know. Ruth looked at me carefully, her voice gentle but firm. Elaine, this is exactly why we do everything documented. The truth doesn't need shouting. It just needs to exist, on paper, in black and white. I nodded, the anger rising, but more focused than before. This wasn't about yelling, or drama, or emotional confrontation. This was about proof, and proof carried weight that Instagram posts, excuses, or empty apologies could never touch. She continued, pulling out the court hearing notice from Maricopa County. The judge had scheduled a review, not of emotions or rhetoric, but of facts. The emails, the deposits, the realtor communications, all of it would be laid before the court. This isn't revenge, Elaine. This is documentation, Ruth said. Your story, your rights, your voice, they only count if you let them be seen. The quiet was heavy, almost tangible. Sabrina hovered near the doorway, her perfect Instagram-ready expression faltering for the first time. Marcus avoided my gaze entirely, like he suddenly realized that logic and efficiency had a limit when confronted by facts. For the first time since waking from surgery, I allowed myself a deep breath. The narrative that had been spun online, the one that made me seem frail, passive, resource-intensive, would not survive scrutiny. Justice here was not flashy. It was steady, unrelenting, undeniable. I traced a finger along the edges of the documents, feeling their weight in my hand. Every email, every receipt, every line of text was a testament not to anger, but to truth. And truth, I realized, could outlast manipulation, outshine curated images, and protect my life and my home in a way shouting never could. They thought they could rewrite reality while I was weak, I whispered to Ruth, my voice steadier than I felt. But reality is patient. And so am I. Ruth smiled faintly, nodding. Exactly. We let the evidence do the work. You stay calm. You stay steady. We'll let the court speak for you. And in that moment, as the afternoon sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, I understood the power of patience, of quiet resilience. The war had begun the day I woke from surgery, but the first victories, small, steady, documented victories, were already taking shape. The courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and printer ink, a quiet reminder that justice could feel as procedural as it was personal. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. Across the room, Sabrina adjusted her blazer, a rehearsed glimmer in her eyes, as if she were still performing for her Instagram audience. Marcus sat beside her, spine rigid, voice clipped, like he was reading from a business operations manual rather than speaking about his own mother. Judge Honorable Patrice Langford entered quietly, her presence commanding without theatrics. The room fell silent immediately. She scanned the paperwork, then looked directly at Sabrina and Marcus. We're here to review the guardianship petition filed on behalf of Elaine Moritz. Let's proceed. Sabrina's tears came first. Slow, deliberate, perfectly timed to tug at sympathetic hearts. She spoke softly, her tone fragile yet pointed. I only want what's best for my mother-in-law, for her safety, for her comfort. She's fragile, and I just want to help. Marcus chimed in, voice smooth, clipped. We've analyzed every possible scenario for optimal care and resource allocation. This petition ensures continuity and mitigates any unnecessary risks. I sat quietly as Ruth stood. She moved with calm authority, spreading the stack of documents on the judge's bench. Email threads. Real estate correspondences. Facility deposit receipts. Pre-signed insurance papers. A timeline of decisions made without my knowledge. She presented them systematically, never raising her voice, letting the evidence speak louder than any performance. Then it was my turn. I rose slowly, my knees reminding me of the surgery, but my voice was clear. Your Honor, I am Elaine Moritz. I am 68 years old, and I just returned from a knee replacement. I am not frail. I am not incapable. What I want is my independence, my home, and the right to make my own decisions. I paused, glancing at Marcus and Sabrina, but not angrily. Just truthfully. I am not here to punish anyone, nor do I seek revenge. I stayed by my loved ones when they were sick. I raised my children to be kind, to care for others, to make decisions with compassion. Now, I ask only for what I have earned, the ability to live with dignity and to continue my life on my terms. Ruth handed me a folder with supporting documents, my medical records, my financial statements, and the signed letters from my neighbors and the social worker, Maya. Judge Langford leaned back slightly, scanning each page. Her voice was calm but firm. After reviewing the evidence, the court finds the guardianship petition to be unfounded and unnecessary. Elaine Moritz retains full authority over her residence and personal affairs. The respondents, Sabrina Reeves and Marcus Moritz, are warned that any further attempts to override her autonomy may result in sanctions. A quiet gasp swept through the gallery. Ruth gave me a small, reassuring nod. All powers of attorney that were altered without consent are hereby nullified, and Elaine Moritz is confirmed as the sole decision-maker regarding her property, finances, and personal care. I felt a wave of relief, but it was tempered by the calm dignity Ruth had encouraged me to maintain. No triumph, no gloating. Just quiet validation. The house was mine. My choices were mine. My voice had been heard. Sabrina's eyes flitted nervously toward me, but she said nothing. Marcus' jaw was tight, his expression unreadable. The court had spoken. The performance was over, and the truth, slow, patient, steady, had won. As we left the courtroom, Ruth whispered gently, "Elaine, this isn't just about today. It's about the record. The proof. The fact that anyone else who tries this in the future will have to answer to it." I exhaled deeply, the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows, warming my shoulders. For the first time since the surgery, I felt a quiet, resilient sense of peace. Not peace from revenge, not peace from anger, but peace from having stood for myself, calmly, steadfastly, with evidence, with dignity, with patience. The courtroom had emptied, but the echoes of what had just happened lingered in my chest like a quiet hum. Marcus walked beside me, but the distance between us felt heavier than ever. He said little on the way home, only occasional clipped sentences about logistics and future planning. I realized that even though the legal battle was over, the emotional one had just begun. Sabrina was already retreating into the curated corners of her digital life. Her Instagram account, once overflowing with staged caregiving content, went quiet. No more pictures of me with captions about grit and grace. No more stories of my supposed fragility juxtaposed with her flawless composure. I didn't feel triumph, just a quiet relief that the performance had ended. Support, though, came from unexpected places. A week after the hearing, a letter arrived, handwritten, no return address. It was from someone who had followed my story online, a stranger who simply wrote, "Thank you for showing that we're not disposable. Keep going. We see you." I folded it carefully and placed it on my bedside table. Frankie Dell, my gruff but steadfast neighbor and Vietnam vet, showed up one morning with a toolbox. He muttered about wanting to fix something for once that matters, and replaced my battered mailbox post with a solid cedar one. He didn't ask for thanks. He didn't post about it online. He just stood back, hands on his hips, and nodded. Pastor Reverend Milton Price from the small Denver church visited quietly, not with cameras or public statements, but with a simple prayer. No theatrics. No grand gestures. He asked for guidance, protection, and clarity, and left me with a gentle hand on my shoulder. His presence reminded me that dignity doesn't need applause. I found myself slowly stepping back into the life I had always loved. I joined the senior book club in Tempe, a mix of retirees who argued passionately over plot twists, favorite authors, and the best local coffee spots. It felt good to be part of something alive, ordinary, yet meaningful. To be seen, not as a subject in someone else's story, but as Elaine Moritz, reader, thinker, neighbor, human. Meanwhile, Sabrina faded from view. No new posts, no calls, no inquiries. The shine of her public image dulled under the quiet scrutiny of those who had witnessed the truth. Marcus remained distant, polite but reserved, as if learning that efficiency cannot replace human connection. I spent evenings reflecting on the paradox of life, how the people who demand the loudest attention often leave the quietest impact, and how the ones who show up with no cameras, no followers, no personal gain, create the strongest threads of legacy. The theme became clear, the antagonist faded into irrelevance, while real life, grounded and steady, quietly grew. The foundation of my days, neighbors, small joys, authentic connections, had not been canceled, coerced, or manipulated. It was mine, and it was resilient. I sat on the same bench where I had spent so many mornings after my surgery, the one facing the small garden that Frankie had helped plant last spring. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of juniper and pine. I thought, they tried to write my ending while I was still breathing. Not just the hospital staff, not just Marcus, not just Sabrina. The world sometimes acts like elders are invisible, disposable, projects to manage. But I was still here. I was still choosing. That afternoon, I drafted a plan quietly, deliberately. Not for revenge. Not for spectacle. I set up a small literacy fund in Daniel's memory, for kids who needed books and mentoring, who, like me, had learned early that knowledge could save you long before money ever could. Every application, every donation, every thank you letter carried a little of the care I had poured into my family, and a little of the dignity I refused to let anyone steal from me. I reflected on the months that had passed. The legal documents, the online posts, the whispered words at the hospital bedside, they all tried to diminish me. But truth doesn't need volume. Consent matters. Presence matters. Love that performs is fleeting, but love that stays builds something permanent. I realized that my fight wasn't about control, or about Marcus. It was about showing that elders, parents, the people who raised us, who lived and sacrificed, cannot be erased because someone thinks they know better. I walked through the small garden, brushing my fingers along the tips of the new flowers, and I thought of all the quiet victories, the small acts of perseverance, the friendships that had appeared unexpectedly, the simple joy of being seen and heard. This was my legacy. Not headlines. Not social media applause. Not a courtroom drama. Just proof that staying, enduring, witnessing, and choosing dignity is more powerful than any shout, any post, any manipulation. And then I spoke softly, almost to myself. We may not be able to control everything in this world, but we can control how we respond. And that is enough. If this story made you angry, good. It means your heart still works. Don't just leave. Subscribe, and tell me in the comments one thing you will never let anyone decide for your parents, or for you when you're older.